Alabama wants to take down Roe versus Wade. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, the Alabama legislature has sent to the governor's desk a legislation that would ban nearly all forms of abortion except in the case of serious health risk to the woman. The legislation was specifically designed to trigger a challenge to Roe v. Wade, the landmark Supreme Court decision that in effect legalized abortion across the country. As you might expect, the normal groups, the ACLU and Planned Parenthood and others, have risen up in anger trying to fight this. But let me ask you a couple of questions about this. First of all, one of the chief criticisms of the Alabama state legislature is that it has so few women in it, and therefore, because women aren't represented, they are passing legislation that is hostile to women.
Are there women in Alabama?
There are quite a few women, I understand.
Probably almost 50% of them, I would imagine.
It sounds reasonable.
Okay, so if
the ones that haven't been aborted previously.
So if Alabama wanted more women legislators, or if more women in Alabama wanted to run for office, then we would see more women in the legislature, I imagine. I believe it's legal for women to run for office in Alabama, so let's just dismiss that argument right off the bat, and proceed to the next argument. This idea that you have to be a woman in order to understand a moral position, or a man for that matter, I simply refuse to buy into in the slightest.
So 22 women out of 144 state lawmakers. Doesn't it sound like there's something institutionally going on there to suppress females as lawmakers?
No.
Just the sheer numbers don't persuade you?
They don't persuade me. What suppression would you like to suppose? Are you telling me that there are women candidates who are banned from office? Are you telling me that the Republican Party has a woman that wants to run for a district and they're saying, no, we got to find ourselves a good old boy? If that is happening, I'm not saying it's not happening, but I am saying if it's happening, I'm also not saying it is happening either. If that's happening, then a woman who's running for office ought to use that immediately as leverage against the establishment, run as a Republican, and sweep into victory. This idea that Alabama's in the Stone Age is a pernicious, miserable slander that's been going on for a long, long time. And mostly it allows people in places like Los Angeles and New York to feel morally superior to the only people they're allowed to still put down, which is white Southerners. But continue, please.
So because you brought up Los Angeles and New York, let me bring up a columnist named Roy Johnson, who in his column pondered what this action would mean for Alabama's growing movie industry. And this is a quote from Johnson's column. Republicans don't care. They don't care if they're anti-woman, anti-business, anti-Alabama's tenuous image bill may cause our newest industry to yell cut just as the cameras are starting to roll. Bill, isn't this bad for business, especially if your business is trying to get a bunch of Hollywood progressives and liberals to come to your state to shoot movies?
Look, abortion is the third rail of politics, and abortion is to the left what gun ownership is to the right. But let me just come out and say that if we're talking, if the guy's argument is that, was it New Jersey or was it New York with those abortion laws that we were talking about a couple of months ago, post-birth abortion?
I believe it was New York.
Okay. So if the argument from the part of the people in New York is saying, well, look, if we don't allow mothers to kill their children after they're born, we could lose a lot of money on this. Is that a position you want to take?
Is with Alabama especially pointing out what you did. Is it a
position you want to take?
The reputation of Alabamans as being these sort of Stone Age, Luddite throwbacks. Isn't it great that Hollywood's finally coming there and making them look positive, and now they're chasing them away by going back to the old 1950s playbook?
This is, well, first of all, the 1950s playbook was back when Alabama was run by Democrats, and all of the racism following the Civil War was done on the part of the Democrats. So let's just get that on the record because it seems to be forgotten with a fair amount of frequency. Now, this is where the world actually becomes a beautiful thing in terms of its philosophy. This is why America works, in my opinion. This is a perfect example of why America works. The people of Alabama, through their representatives, are faced with a decision. They have a position that's morally different than people in other parts of the country. That's because there are many, many, many different countries inside the United States. And the people of Alabama, if they decide to pass this legislation, I am sure are fully aware, and if they're not, then they should be made fully aware that this might hurt the interests of their state financially and hurt their personal interests financially. But I suspect that if you put that same question to the people of Alabama, you would get an answer that would be far more satisfying on a moral basis than the one you would get from New York.
Well, this is not the first time that Alabama has, that the legislature in Alabama has tried to pass anti-abortion legislation. And some of the critics point out that the last time around, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, sued, and that court battle, which ultimately the state of Alabama lost, cost, in the name of, in the terms of one activist, it cost the state money for 33 classroom teachers, 41 state troopers, or 50 prison guards. In other words, a couple of $1 million that Alabama had to pay out because the ACLU beat them in court. Do you think this is kind of ignorant on the part of lawmakers in Alabama to push this, even though they know that the ACLU and Planned Parenthood are going to come down on them with both feet?
If you want to make that argument, which is a repulsive argument to make, then why not just fill in the other half of the equation, right? In other words, if you're saying that by Alabama putting these restrictions on abortion is costing them this many policemen and prison guards, then the other half of the equation is how many aborted babies, what is the dollar value of an aborted baby?
And how many would have become prison guards?
No, well, put that aside. In other words, if you're saying that by restricting abortion, you are limiting the income of the state to this degree, where we can tell you 77 teachers and 66 prison guards, what's the dollar value on an aborted baby? How much money are we talking here? You had to have made that calculation somewhere. So what's the price of a human life? What is it? How much money is it? How much money are we talking about?
So now, are you talking about on a moral basis? Or are you saying if those people had all been born, what would be their value as taxpayers?
No. Forget that. Forget that downstream stuff. I'm talking about right now. What they're saying is, if we make it more difficult to get an abortion in Alabama and more babies survive because of that, that's going to cost us enough money to pay for 66 prison guards. What is your calculation? What is the cost of an aborted baby? How much money do they bring in? That's the argument. If you're going to make the argument that if we keep these abortion standards, we'll have more prison guards. Okay. How much money is every aborted baby worth to the state coffers?
There's another question here, and that is just one of political expediency in terms of timing. President Trump has had 2 appointments now to the U.S. Supreme Court. Clearly, this Alabama move is expected to be challenged and to be run up the flagpole, so to speak, all the way to the Supreme Court level if they get their way in Alabama. Bill, do you think that just having Gorsuch and Kavanaugh join the other so-called constitutionalist judges on the court is enough at this point to press this? Or would you like them to have waited a little longer until they could, refill, for example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat or whoever happens to be the next retiring justice?
Even without the abortion issue on this one, I think that argument is completely specious. I think the idea that we should wait until the political weather is better is just a recipe for even more miserably bad government. If Ruth Bader Ginsburg is on extended vacation in Switzerland, let's say, then that simply means that the conservative majority in the court is even higher. Presuming there's no such chicanery as like voting by proxy or any of that kind of stuff. If you want to vote, Ms. Ginsburg, then you're going to have to be there to vote. But if you're not able to vote for whatever reason, then instead of a 6-3 majority, you have a 6-2 majority, or
Well, that's
whatever
not
the case.
that's not the scenario I was envisioning. I'm literally talking about whatever the next replacement justice is. Whenever the next person retires, leaves, dies, then President Trump gets to pick another one. Wouldn't it have been better for Alabama to wait and make sure that they had a lock on that Supreme Court?
No, the people that are pushing this legislation are fighting a ticking time bomb of children's lives. This is their position on it. Their moral and ethical position is that children are being murdered. That's you don't have to agree with that, but that's their position. And their position is that every day that we wait is costing us more lives. So this idea of triangulating when the best time to make this thing happen is not a calculation I'd want to make. It's like saying, well, we got a raid where we can basically free the prisoners at Auschwitz, but we might want to wait until better weather, or until the press secretary comes back, or until the president comes back from vacation, or whatever the case may be. This is an issue that is time sensitive, to say the least, Scotty.
Well, I guess I wonder whether there's anybody at the national level in the Republican Party, for example, involved in any kind of strategizing here, because if you were going to mount a challenge as significant as a challenge to Roe versus Wade, you'd think that there would be some broader picture, not just the tactical move of, wow, these rogue legislators in Alabama are doing this, but a broader movement across the country so that they have a lot more support going into this, overturning what has now become, sort of a stare decisis pillar for the Supreme Court. They have a tendency to let the precedent stand. They need to see the American public really rising up against this. And I'm not sure little Alabama, with all the caricatures that you pointed out before, is the place to start, is it?
Well, I suspect the reason that a group of rogue legislators in Alabama are taking this action is because they've sat there for 50 years watching and waiting for this convergence of forces, and having not seen it happen, have decided to simply take action on their own. I admire that regardless of what their political cause is. These are people who are undoubtedly representing the views of the majority of their constituents. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Little Alabama, Alabama's size does not have any influence on whether or not Alabama is right or not. And that's true in any argument, regardless of what the particular topic is. You can be alone in the world with an argument and be on the right side of that argument, not just the factually correct side, but the moral side as well, against the entire world. And numbers don't enter into this kind of thing.
One wonders, Bill, based on the historical record of the Republican Party, why it is Alabama. Why is it not Texas? Why is it not Utah? Why is it not some of the states that are considered to be strong, conservative powerhouses of growth and prosperity and things like that? Do you think that the Republican Party has outgrown its pro-life position?
No, I don't think they've outgrown its pro-life position. I think that if you want to reduce it to the Republican Party and reduce it to a polling issue, I think the pro-life movement is stronger now than it was 10, 15 years ago, significantly stronger, especially after what's happened in New York and so on.
Because of that, or because of other factors?
Just because of other factors. I think that look, the proponents of Roe v. Wade were saying safe, legal, and rare, right? Wasn't that it? Okay. Well, it's 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? So I think it has been a surprise to many Americans who this is the most difficult moral calculation on the table today politically. I'm not saying internally or morally or for me or for anybody else, but in terms of the country, this one is exceedingly difficult, and it's only difficult because of one thing, Scott. If that fetus is a person, then the federal government, or whatever government, the state of Alabama government, has an obligation to protect the life of that person. That's the job of the government, and that is the job of the law. If it's a person, then there is moral justification for legal action to protect that person. If it is not a person, if it is a collection of cells that is not yet a person, then this is intrusion and invasion of an individual's right on an unprecedented scale. And so you have to ask yourself, is it a person, yes or no? And this is the discussion that we need to have in this country. This is the discussion. To the degree that this Alabama challenge might take this to Supreme Court, if it took it to the Supreme Court, we would finally, as a nation, have to have a discussion about the only issue here that matters. It's not a question of anything other than, is this a person or is it not? If it's not a person, then who the hell is the government of the United States or Alabama to tell an individual person what to do in anything, let alone their own personal physical condition? But if it is a person, then that person is morally protected, not just by the constitutional rights of America, but by the fundamental morality of every society pretty much in the history of human civilization. So this is the question. And through technology, we now face the question on a much deeper level than we had to face it before. The reason I say that is because our understanding now of the gestation and pregnancy process and our ability to preserve the life of infants who are born 3, 4, 5, sometimes 4 or 5 months prematurely tests the premise in a way that had not been tested previously in human experience.
Now, it's quite possible that the Alabama case will not make its way through the justice process quickly enough to have an effect from a judicial perspective on the 2020 election. But let me ask you this. Should the Republican Party and candidates for Congress and state offices and for the presidency across the country going into 2020 lift the banner of Alabama's pro-life legislature and say, these are the kind of people that we once were. These are the kind of people we should be again. I'm running to make sure we answer this most crucial of all questions.
That's a very, very good question. The Republican Party has traditionally been a pro-life party. The Democratic Party is the pro-choice. But you know what? Let's just chuck these advertising terms. Okay, let's just throw them out because they're useless. They do nothing but muddy the waters. The Republican Party tends to be anti-abortion. The Democratic Party tends to be pro-abortion. This doesn't change. The question is, do you want to turn this into is this where you not where you want to plant a flag, because that flag is already planted? Is it where you want to plant the flag? And this one is a very tough one. And the reason that I say this is not because I'm making political calculations, but because there is such honest disagreement on this subject from people on what is essentially a very personal moral decision. This is why I say that this shows the beauty of America, because the people in Alabama who have elected the representatives who are taking this step have an opinion about this that is undoubtedly different than the opinion from the people who live in San Francisco. And this is wonderful. What we constantly hear is that people in San Francisco should not have to live by the rules, the repressive, religious, straight-laced, moralistic, hypocritical, Bible-thumping rules of the people in Alabama. We've heard that story many times. But the story we never hear is that the people of Alabama should not have to live by the as a friend of mine once put, legions of Christ-hating sodomites in San Francisco either. So this sword cuts both ways. And the only way a country like America, with so many diverse and varied peoples trying to live under one government, the beautiful thing about this is that what Alabama is doing is it is America working. It's the idea of America working. And you may consider it, if you're a progressive, you may consider this rolling back the clock. And without question, without question, we will hear the argument that the next thing that Alabama will want to do is reestablish colored-only water fountains. And the only response to that is that's no longer a threat because Democrats no longer have a lock on Alabama.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Whittle now comes to you 5 days a week. We examine the questions that are in the breaking news, but the principles upon which these answers are founded have faced the test of time and triumphed. And we are glad to be part of a team of people who believes in those principles, who are willing to support it from their own wallets. If you'd like to join that team, you can just go to BillWhittle.com and click the Become a Member link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this happen.